Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think we are online. I'm just going to double check to make sure we are going so everybody can hear me. Okay, I think we are. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Mark Ketterhagen. I am the principal at the high school at ISP, the proud principal, and I'd like to first just introduce you to my colleague, Mr. Lin. Andrew, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. And for those new to our community, welcome. My name is Andrew Lin. I am the Dean of Academics here at the high school and also the IB coordinator. And I'm happy to be here to talk to you about some of the questions you might have.
Great. So a few housekeeping things first. If you are more comfortable listening in Spanish, we have an interpretation, a translation service that we can offer. So if you look to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there'll be a button that says interpretation, and you can click that, and you should be able to hear this conversation in Spanish if that's better for you. And then secondly, there is a Q&A button. And so Andrew and I, Mr. Lin and I are going to talk a little bit and define some of the things that we think might be useful for you. But over the course of that conversation, if there's a question that you'd like to really be sure that we answer or that you want to make sure we hear, please feel free to enter it by pressing that Q&A button, and we will answer it if we can. So, all right, let's get started. So I want to just first thank you all for being here for this conversation, and thank you for your trust in the work that we take really seriously in meeting the needs of students and doing everything we can to support them through what's a really difficult time in teaching and learning, and has been challenging for teachers and for students and for parents as well. So we have a couple of objectives today. One of the things we really want to do today is talk about what blended learning is. I think different schools and different places, you might hear different definitions. And so we want to make sure that you really understand what we're talking about when we're using the phrase blended learning. And specifically, so you understand what that means for your children, what they're actually doing when they're at school, when they're virtual, when they're at home. We want to make sure you really understand that. Andrew Lin is an IB expert, and he's going to hit our second objective, which is to talk a little bit more about the specifics of IB, particularly around curriculum coverage and hour requirements and some of the accommodations or adaptations that the IBO has made for students who are in that program. And he'll be talking a little bit about that. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. So I'd like to jump in. Andrew, I'm going to first start by just offering a definition of blended learning, an operational definition, and then maybe you can unpack that a little more, provide some examples, and we can have a quick conversation about what this might mean for students. So let's go. So first, here's a definition up on your screen. And this comes from a text that we've been really using for the past several months to ensure that we're delivering research-driven practices in teaching and learning for students. And that definition is, blended learning is the combination of active, engaged learning online combined with an active, engaged learning offline to provide students with more control over the time, the place, the pace, and the path of their learning. So one of the most important things that we've been working on as a staff is this idea that not everybody learns in exactly the same way, in the same place at the same time. Right now is a really good example. There are some people on this call who are listening to me in English, and there are other people who it's better to listen to this in Spanish because they're learning better with that language. And learning happens the same way in classrooms, that sometimes there are students who may learn better doing one activity than the other. And blended learning gives us the flexibility to provide students with different types of learning opportunities that will help them the best. One of the things that we're bounded by right now is an alpha split in student capacity. This means that we can only have half of the students, up to half the students on campus at one time because of capacity limits. And that's a bummer because we want to have all students here every single day. That's what we want. We know that by having students in our classroom, we have the best chances at reaching them individually and maximizing their learning. We also know that there's a whole heck of a lot that we can do when students are at home in order to enhance their learning. because we know them being at home is a reality that's out of our control right now. And so Andrew's going to talk, Mr. Lynn's going to talk a little bit about what might be some concrete examples of how this happens, and even presenting it from the mind of kind of what a teacher might be thinking and what a student might be thinking. So Andrew, do you want to jump into a couple of the examples that you have, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Ketterhagen. So on the next slide is just a question I want to pose to you. In a regular school time, not during a pandemic, what kinds of things happen during a regular 60-minute period in an in-person class full of kids? Now, as you're thinking about that, you'll probably come up with several different ideas. I hope you will, because our teachers are very skilled and they come up with a variety of ideas of how to teach in-person class. So what I'd like to illustrate is that many of those strategies can be applied also to asynchronous or at-home study, or at least part of it could be done in person when they're in person, and the other part could be done at home when they're at home. So for example, what you might see is an example on the next slide. Here's an example of how perhaps a 60-minute period might be divided in person. You might start off with the teacher speaking, possibly with some visuals, giving instructions, teaching them something for a quick mini lesson at the very beginning, and the students following, all watching the teacher and listening and engaging. And the students may be asking questions and the teacher will be able to answer those live. Then, as is common, we might split up into an activity where the students might work in small groups. And the instructions for that activity would have been given in the initial 10 minutes, and then the students are carrying on. And I've seen a lot of examples where the students are very good at following the instructions, they're good at getting engaged, and they don't need any other assistance. So the teacher is obviously going around to the different groups at this time and offering some assistance, but sometimes that isn't really necessary. So that could take the bulk of the lesson. In high school, there's sometimes pretty advanced concepts that require the students to really think and delve deeply. So which is 40 minutes is a reasonable amount of time for them to really get into it and learn something and follow the instructions and do the activity. And then, for example, in the last 10 minutes, we might all come back, or we might not, and then the students will have to do something individually. Let's say they had to do something in a group, and then individually they need to say, okay, what did you learn from this and what questions did you have? And then give that as an exit ticket to the teacher. And then after class, the teacher would look at all those exit slips individually from all the students, because each individual student did something different, and they would be able to assess, okay, all right, these 10 students seem to have this, these five students are struggling with this, and these 2 students really have no idea what's going on. And that's information for the teacher to use in their next lesson. Okay, now on the next slide, I want to show you that almost all of these things can also happen asynchronously, at least at home. So number one, the teacher speaking and the students following along. We often use Screencastify, which is one of our many tech tools for teachers to record themselves, including visuals and in a video format, and that can be given to the students ahead of time, and the students can watch that. And one of the benefits of that, in fact, over live instruction, is that they can rewatch a couple of times if they didn't really understand the instructions. Now, in the next one, where they have an activity where they work in small groups, you could do that offline as well. And then, like not offline, but at home, the teacher could say, okay, if you're offline, you need to, if you're at home, you get into your groups, get into small groups and pre-design the groups. And the students are very good at creating their own links to have a meeting, and the students can meet with each other and talk and do the activity at home without the teacher guidance. Then they could still, offline without the teacher, create that accountability piece and do that instruction and consolidate their learning and submit that to the teacher at home. And then the teacher at their home would be opening that up and looking at the accountability piece. So the only thing here really that can't be done is the teacher going around answering questions as you go live, because the teacher is busy with the in-person students. But if the experience is thoughtfully designed, and we think our teachers will be able to do that, there shouldn't be very many questions at all. And so the students will be able to handle the activity effectively. So that's one example of how you could turn an in-person lesson into an online, into a completely at-home lesson. Now, the reality is we're going to have a mix of the two. So there might be times where within, you might have one group in person and the other group is online doing something a little bit different, but that's okay because you'll see them again on the following day. So another example is something called station rotation, which we don't have a visual here, but where one station does something and another station does something else. And then so you could have, for example, an in-person station where you're doing something and then the other station is at home, and then you could flip that the next day so that the kids are doing both stations. And that doesn't mean that we're slowing down, because that would have happened anyways in a normal world even, because oftentimes that happens. And I think the key to remember is that no one strategy or one method is going to be used by the teachers all the time, because we're going to have a mix of different strategies and different ideas because we want our students to have different experiences.
Andrew, I'd love to discuss that point a little bit more because I think it's an important one. So you're giving some examples of different types of activities that students might do while they're at home learning. Does that mean students are doing whatever they want, whenever they want? Is it self-directed? So they're just teaching themselves? Like who's designing those activities? How is it determined what they're doing? Like in what way is this guided by the teacher, or is it just completely student driven? I think it's an important point to dive into a little when we talk about blended learning.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I forgot to mention the teacher is always, in the driver's seat to say, and they're directing the experiences and like, this is what the students are going to do. Now, of course, we want student voice and student choice. So we invite the students to have their input as well. And usually the activities will be designed so that there is some element of student choice. For example, the teacher might say, okay, you're going to research something, and the students have the choice of what that something is. Or the students might be able to choose their group. So we always want student voice to be a part of it. But it's not a free-for-all, because there's specific instructions from the teacher. Now, it might not be that there's specific instructions for the student every single day. Like you have to do it. There might be a fairly complex activity that the students could be working on for several days and several periods. And it not necessarily be every single day there's a check on what's going to happen. There might be an accountability piece that happens every 2 days or after a 3-day experience where the students have had some time to work on it on their own and also get some feedback from the teacher. So it's not to say that every single at-home lesson will have an accountability piece if it's not necessary at that point in time. Again, many in high school, many of the concepts are long. Some of the summative assessments take weeks to work on. So they'll have many stages of check-ins. And so not every single lesson requires all the time to have some kind of check-in from the teacher.
Andrew, I think that's a great point. And, as you talked about how the at-home learning experiences are designed by the teacher, which is a really important thing, because that's different from just self-learning, where a student is just choosing to read something online. So students are getting these experiences at home. When they come to school, the teacher is not necessarily then just repeating the same thing in person that they did the day before, because the teacher is building upon the learning that happened at home. So let's say, let's say there were 6 days of learning, and I have alternating students coming each day. On day 1, I might be beginning some introductory activity with those students in person, while the students at home might also be doing some introductory understandings or readings or learnings. And then on day 2, those students coming from home, they're not just doing day 1. They're actually moving to the second day of learning to be built upon the first day of learning that they had remotely, that was designed by the teacher. And, one of the things about this, as a former high school English teacher, that's really hard. It's really hard to do as a teacher, because it means you're designing instruction for the students who are in your room and students who are at home every day. And that can feel like double the amount of work. And our teachers have just really been working their tails off to design both at-home learning experiences and in-school learning experiences that are valuable for students, in order to not just teach one thing, give kids busy work at home, teach that thing again, give kids busy work. That's really what we're trying to avoid, to ensure that students are having authentic, continuous learning experiences rotating from home to back at school. Andrew, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, we had a good exercise the other day where we took a lesson and we were trying to identify which components of these could be done at home and which components could be done at school. And if we want to expand that, so some of our teachers are thinking in terms of units. Okay, I've got a whole unit. I've got 3 or 4 weeks to work with. What things can I do at home? What things can the students do at home? What things can the students do in class? And what things are better to do in class and what things are better to do at home? And then so they can design their whole unit, which could be a month long, and it could be, so they're planning ahead of time, like, okay, I know these 3 things are the things you need to do in class, and these 4 things are the things that the students will have to do at home. So the planning is really important. And so teachers are really thinking about their whole units. They're not necessarily, I would say, thinking lesson by lesson. They're more thinking in terms of units, because units are very large and we always have the end in mind in terms of, that's one of the things we're working towards more this year, is to make sure we have the end in mind. Like, what is it at the end that we want students to be able to achieve? How are we going to get there? And through that pathway, that journey, there's going to be some at-home experiences and there's going to be some in-class experiences. As I would say in regular school. In regular school, kids do some stuff at home and they do some stuff in person as well. So it's just a different mix of how that's going to come together.
Andrew, one thing I'd love to build on, and there's a question in the chat that I just want to answer live, is the plans to change the in-person program and stop using Zoom at school. And I'd love to just talk about that a little bit. So last year, as we were attempting to get students back on campus and back into the routine of learning, we used synchronous Zoom calls frequently as a way to ensure that the students at home and the students at school were together. And that was an accountability measure as well as a community building measure. So, hey, we're all together even though we're not all here. There were some downsides to that we received loud and clear through parent surveys and student surveys and staff surveys. And one of them is that students were getting a lot of screen time. There was a lot of time sitting in front of a computer. And these days I'm looking at a computer a whole lot and my eyes hurt and my body hurts at the end of looking at a screen for so long. And one of the things we really aim to accomplish this year is to provide our students who are in person really, really high quality, interactive, non-screen based learning experiences. There might be times that you're going to use a computer because you need it, but there are also going to be a lot of times that students may be working in a small group or maybe safely moving around a classroom or be having an engaging debate or discussion with their teacher. And so, Monica, I love the question. That's something that we're absolutely going to be doing more of this year. Because of that, and this is really important to mention, because we're doing that, because we're working really hard to increase the quality of in-person learning, that means the teacher's not always going to be there at the same time to be on a Zoom call with the students who are home, because they can't do those 2 things at the same time. And so it would be, if we could have a teacher who was teaching the students who are in the room and also a teacher who is teaching the students at home at the same time, that would be incredible, but would require double the amount of staff. And so we know that using these the approaches to blended learning, that we can still provide really authentic learning experiences for students who are at home, so that the learning experiences at school are interactive, they're engaging, they're fun, and those are the types of things that are so valuable to us at ISP. And is one of the reasons why we just so strongly encourage parents to send their students for our in-person programming as soon as they're ready and as soon as they feel safe, because we believe that'll be a big driver of quality learning at our school. Andrew, did you want to shift to talking a little bit about IB? I know we can come back to some of these blended learning concepts and I'll review the questions, but maybe now would be a good time to pivot to our second big point and you to talk a little bit about some of the IB requirements and how we're managing some of that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So on the next slide is there was a couple of questions about the number of hours. So I can address that. The IB recommends a minimum of 150 hours for SL courses and 240 hours for HL courses. And within our Bell schedule, we do comply with that. if we're counting, obviously, some of that instruction and learning that's going to happen at home, which it will. In addition, from last year, which is the 2021 class, and this year, the 2022 class, which is current grade 12s, the IB has recognized the impact of the global pandemic, and they've reduced the content and requirements of most of their subjects, if almost all of them. Thus, the amount of stuff that has to be learned by the students, or the depth of stuff that has to be learned by the student, has been lowered. That has been communicated quite publicly by the IB for many months. So like class of 2022 students, hopefully you've known about that from your teachers for quite a number of months. I don't remember which month they announced that, but they knew very early on that that had to change. So our class of 2021 was able to manage in this pandemic to learn whatever they needed to learn in the time allotted. And we have confidence that you will be able to achieve that same standard. And we're happy that the IB has been sensitive to that and recognized the need for adjustments to be made. And those are standard across the whole world. Every single student in the world, whether they're online or in person or hybrid, is getting the same accommodations. That's for the grade 12s. For the grade 11s, we're just about to start class of 2023. If you're about to begin grade 11, IB has not yet indicated what modifications are going to be made. And I recently contacted our IB manager, who's assigned to our school, working in, I think, Den Haag, in The Hague in the Netherlands. They have not yet made that decision. And of course, as they always do, once they decide, they will let us know, and then we will communicate that to you. And we are hoping that they will continue to recognize the effects of the pandemic are continuing in many, if not all countries, and that similar modifications will be made for this year. But right now, because we don't have that yet, we need to anticipate that potentially the students are going to have to, would be going back to the full curriculum. So it's too early right now to tell what the IB has decided. What other IB requirements are there? Really, like the IB is not really about number of hours. It's about the curriculum and the learning that has to happen. And our teachers know that, and they know what the assessments are going to look like. And they're preparing our students to be able to achieve those assessments within the confines of whatever the curriculum is and what the reality here is at ISP.
Andrew, thank you. So I'm just going to take a moment to look at the chat. I'm trying to answer these as quickly as I can.
Mark, I'll give you a few more seconds.
Great.
I have scheduled, or I'm about to schedule a grade 12 parent meeting, and that will be taking place in about 2 weeks. That is more generic information about IB, like IB academic specific. Again, I'm reminding you about grading and assessment. And at that meeting, I plan to give you some more updates. If we get any updates in the last 2 years, that'll be another opportunity for me to clarify some of the IB things, not necessarily related to blended learning, but more just what you need to know as a parent of a grade 12 IB student, like what are the things coming up. And there'll be a separate meeting for the students only, again, to remind you students what you need to know as an IB student. So there may be more information coming up in about 2 weeks at that other meeting. That one's a little bit more academic focus. And I'll have some more IB specific content, but basically I can go through in more detail what the modifications are if you need to know, parents. Students should already know, but for parents, I am happy to go through some more details there, but I do have some other things that, and I did this last year as well for all the grade 12 parents, just so that we establish a dialogue and continue the conversation about IB.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much. I'm looking at the questions here. So 2 of them I can name here. Vaccinated students being able to go back full time. I believe we're still under capacity regulations, even if students are vaccinated. I think those have not changed. Let's see. I'll just answer any others that I can answer right away. Yeah, I see where, okay, Miss Dr. Menard's answering there. Hey, Andrew, there's a question here that I think you could answer live. Could you please discuss more of how you plan to address the laboratory element of science courses, especially in IB? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Right. So for the class of 2022, the grade 12 students, what happened is the IB recognizes that not all students were able to access laboratories. So in terms of the requirement, the simulations are acceptable by the IB. And that is what we did last year. We did a lot of simulations. We modified laboratories so that they could be done at home, like some very basic and safe procedures and equipment that could be done at home by our students. And then towards the end of the year, when we could get students back, so some students were doing practical labs in the class. So we expect that to be actually a lot better this year, because we will get the students in, pretty much every student in at least half the time. So they can do in-person laboratories, and it'll be even better because you'll have less students to manage in the lab space. So there will be a lot more space and attention from our science teachers and our laboratory technicians to guide the students on doing labs in person safely.
Thanks, Andrew. Andrew, I'll let you look at the chat. There's a couple more IB, and I'll field a few questions here. Scott, thanks for the great questions there, and I appreciate your kind words. 3 questions. I'll do my best to answer live here. So will there be a way for teachers to ensure that students are not given more than 2 tests per day? Yes, and Andrew and I are working very hard on that. That's very important to us. We're doing that in a couple of ways. Number one, we're setting up infrastructure for communication internally to ensure that that doesn't happen. Especially now, more than 2 tests per day is too much. And that's something we really want to avoid as a school. The second mechanism we're putting in place is to ensure that students are able to communicate with those teachers, but if ever that's being scheduled. It seems like it would be an easier thing to accomplish than it is, but when you have a high school class and that of, let's say, 15 students, and then those 50 students go off to 15 different teachers, it's harder than it might seem to coordinate, but we're putting a calendar system in place, and that's a big priority for us, Scott. So I appreciate you asking that question. And if there are students who are concerned that they're having more than 2 tests a day, 2 mechanisms or 3 would be to go to you, and I'm always open to hear from any parents. 2, they can come directly to me, and 3, student council. This is something we've talked about with them, and they have representation through student council who we meet with regularly. So great question. Second question about large open spaces like the gym and auditorium. Yeah, a couple people have asked that question. We have a few large open spaces, but we can have 30, 35 classes that are meeting at the same time. And it's just not feasible to find 30 to 40 spaces around the campus to use outdoors. I wish if it were a little cooler and a little less rainy, we could be out maybe in the field or something, but it's just, there's some big challenges there in using those spaces. So, we'll use them as backup spaces when we need to, but unfortunately it's not a whole scale solution, but I love the creative thinking. And then 3, is it possible to split cohorts into smaller groups to have the in-person experience and comply with Maduka at the same time? So our classes are already in small groups. I think what I hear you saying is, could you take a class that's taught by a teacher and further break it into smaller groups? And then we would have 2 groups. It again becomes a space issue. So at the high school, nearly every single room is used nearly all the time. We just really use the heck out of our space in order to lower our class sizes as much as possible. And so if you're to walk around the school building during a school day, you rarely will find empty classrooms, because we just really use our space. And so unfortunately there'd be a people problem and a space problem that we can't break the classes further into smaller spots, as we wouldn't have a place to put them or a person to teach that course. Those are great questions, and I really appreciate you posing them. Okay, let's see here. Andrew, did you want to answer any IBs? You have any IB questions?
Yeah, there's one. Where is it? Yeah, what has the school learned about teaching IB courses online blended learning compared to in person? One challenge we have identified, and I think is is pretty normal, is that this does place a little bit more of an onus on the students. We need the students to be our partners here in supporting their own learning, and to be very attentive to the instructions, because most likely when you're at home, it will be more difficult to ask questions of the teachers. So if you're very clear about the instructions, ask the questions while you're in person, while you can get immediate answers so that you understand the instructions at what you need to do. And we are hoping that, the students will be happy to do that. One of our goals is, student engagement and student, what's the word? There's a word for agency. So the students have agency over their own learning, and the students take control, and they know what they need to, and we can set them up properly by like giving them an outline of what you need to do, what you need to learn by the end of the year. And so they know, okay, I need to do this, and this is what I need to do. I don't understand this, so I need to ask the teacher this. And that student agency is really a really important skill, not just for IB, but for life. And that's why, and some of those skills, we hope probably have been developed already through elementary and middle school. They're very good at that. And through our advisory program, which is changing a little bit for the better this year. So we do think that we can improve on that note.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's see. Oh, there's a great question here that I'd love to answer live. The chat function, you've done a great job. Here's a good question. Could you describe how does an average day for a high school student look in a blended learning model when he or she is required to be at home? That's just a really great question. So you heard me talk a little bit about screen time and the effect that we know it has on kids. And so one of the things we don't want to do is to have students who are just on screens all the time. And so at-home schooling could be students working the same amount of time as a normal class period. It could be a lesser amount of time. It could be more, depending on what's going on within that particular unit. So it actually depends, but for an average day, what that might look like is a student is going to have a list of things that he or she could do from home. It may include sometimes getting online to conference with a teacher, but sometimes it won't. Sometimes it would involve work that the student could do independently. So their day would involve some degree of choice in, I'm going to do my English work now, or I'm going to do my math work now, or I may do my science work now, combined with some accountability measures. And what I mean by that is, I know that I need to type a summary of my learning today and get it to my teacher before I finish my school day. Or I know that I might need to send a quick video summary of the things that I learned today so my teacher can check in with me and know that I got that done. Or I know that I have office hours with my teacher today, and we've asked all of our teachers to establish office hours for the students who are home. So those are the types of things students might do while they're home. It's going to vary a little bit by their grade, by the course that they're in, and by the choices that student is making and how to engage their learning. Thank you for that question. Andrew, a question about IB textbooks.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that one by typing.
Let's see. Oh, here's a question. As you're doing that, Andrew, I'll keep answering questions here. So there are classes when there are only 6 kids. So isn't it hard for a teacher to have it divided into 2 with so few kids? Yes, it totally is. That is a really unfortunate thing about online school. It's if I have a class of 6, and it's pretty rare, but sometimes it does happen. And then we have 4 of them who are on the front half of the alphabet and 2 of them are at the end half of the alphabet. What do we do about that? Well, an easy solution, you could just say, well, just have all those kids come on one day. But there are 9 other classes that all of those students have. And that has a ripple effect that would just be like a set of dominoes. And so you can't start changing every student in order to accommodate one class, because you'll end up pulling kids out of the wrong side of another class. And so this is the challenge of being a teacher during hybrid learning. And we don't choose this system. And it's certainly, I'd prefer to have all students here every day. But yeah, that's a challenge. And my answer to that would be, one, our teachers are figuring out ways to have community with those 6 students, even though it's hard. And 2, this is why we really, really push hard for our students to be able to attend in person, and we encourage them to show up. Hey, Ms. Newman, thanks for your question. So when will students receive their schedule? A couple answers to that. So all the students received their schedules in June. So students who were at ISP High School received 1 copy of their schedule. I'll be sending an email to all parents tonight, and we're also we're waiting on one more tech update, but then are going to push out all their students' schedules to them, hopefully tonight, if all technology goes well. So students can expect their schedules very, very soon, hopefully before tonight. And so tell them to check their email addresses, and they should have those soon. And if they don't, we'll have copies, digital copies of all student schedules when they arrive at school, but hopefully they can access their email and click on that link to get their updated schedule before Thursday. Thanks for that question, Ms. Newman. Claudia, I love your comment there. I know that's more of a comment than a question, but just so others can understand, I appreciate you offering your help and support and attending meetings. I'm so with you. We have our fingers crossed that we want to be able to get our high school students here every single day. I promise you. I will be celebrating along with you as soon as we get that news, and we just really, really hope that that can happen soon. I just want you all to know, and I appreciate the kind words there, that our teachers are double planning now. I mean, they're planning for this hybrid thing. Then as soon as they hear that we can have all students on campus, they'll go back and scrap all the hours that they put in and redesign those learning experiences. So our students are really, really breaking their backs to try and make it work for kids. And I appreciate your kind words. You've always been so supportive. So thank you very much. I'm going to keep it's better for me to talk because the written ones, you know, you can't really see what I'm writing. Christina has a great question about what about kids that are not responsible or proactive? Will the teachers follow up with them in any way to make sure they're doing their work at home in a timely fashion? Christina draws the point. Otherwise, those students are really going to suffer with the new system, and not all parents can be on top of them all day to make sure they're working. And I'm with you. I hear you. So, Christina, this is where a really strong partnership between the school and the student and the families or the parents or guardians needs to exist. We'll have accountability measures in place, and my teachers are asking that exact same question. I can promise you. They're looking at me and they're saying, "What are you going to do? What are we going to do when students don't do the learning experiences that we've designed for them at home? What are we going to do about that?" And I think I hear you saying, "What are you guys going to do when students don't do the work at home?" And, you know, we're going to hold students accountable in every way that we can. So typically in a given day, there's going to be an accountability measure that a student must complete in order to provide evidence that they've done their task for that day. So Christina, if you were a student in my English class, I might say, "Hey, I really want you to read this piece. I want you to respond to this piece of literature in the following ways and write it down. And then I want you to send me an email before you close your school day today with a summary of that reading." If you don't do that, I may mark you absent as a way to signal to a parent and to a teacher that the student at home didn't complete their at-home work, or as a teacher, I may communicate with the parent and say, "Hey, is everything okay with Christina? Christina didn't get anything done today. I just want to make sure she's feeling okay." We know that you can't sit there over your child's shoulder all the time. You're working, and we know that's not possible. It's also not possible for the teachers to deliver really quality in-person instruction for the students who are here while also chasing the students around at home. And so their accountability has to fall on the students too. And You know, one reality of high school is that we are the step before post-secondary learning, and students go on to college. And when students get to college, those safety nets disappear pretty quickly. That if they aren't doing the things that they are supposed to do, and they're not going to the classes that they're supposed to be going to, or doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, they get into big trouble pretty quickly. And the school doesn't keep them around, and their grades really suffer. And we're certainly not keeping students around. We're keeping students here, even if they struggle with at-home learning. But we're going to work really hard to teach our students the value of that independent responsibility and getting that work done. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure it's not only falling on parents' shoulders. And any support you can provide us in communication, we value that deeply, because what you're getting at something that's really hard. And as I'm sure you know, as parents of high school students, holding high school age students accountable for their actions is hard. And that it's especially hard now. And so it's something my teachers are asking about and we're thinking about, and just being super transparent with you, it's going to be something that's a challenge, but we're going to work really hard to open up lines of communication so we can do that together. Andrew, any questions you want to address?
Just a couple of quick ones.
Yeah.
Please, could you guide us how to get access to previous IB question papers? We cannot release those to students and parents. We have our own access to our those questions for our teachers, but as a rule, the IB does not permit us to release those to students and parents, unfortunately. However, I can say that most of the IB teachers are using those previous questions as practice. So the vast majority of teachers will already be able to be giving some previous IB question papers to their kids as part of the course. That is okay to do as practice questions, including potentially the answer schemes and of what the correct answers and why they're the correct answers. So thank you, Vinita, for that question.
So I'd love to answer Maria's question live. So Maria's asking, what would learning look like for a student who stays at home all the time? So that's 100% online learning. So they would be completing much of that home, the home at-home learning experiences that the teacher is designing for students. The only difference is that every other day, they're not getting to go in and then enhance that learning with the teacher and the rest of their class. And that's an added challenge. That's an added learning challenge. That doesn't mean it's impossible. They can progress through at-home learning modules and still have access to the curriculum and still have access to the assessments and still have teacher check-ins through office hours or through meetings or through in-class check-ins. It's harder because they don't have as much face time with the teacher, where teachers can immediately see if they're struggling, but it's possible. And the approach is similar to if you've ever taken an online course where there's a real instructor and you may have online check-ins with that person and you may have office hours with that person, but you may never be actually attending fully in-person instruction. I will offer my honest opinion that that's very hard. And so we hope that all of our students will take advantage of in-person instruction as soon as possible, because we know our ability to reach them is most challenging if they're not physically here. But that is the plan for students who opt to experience at-home learning. But again, we just urge in-person learning as much as possible, because we know that the learning cycle is the least likely to be interrupted if they're here physically. Armel, great question. Armel asked if a student stays home one day because they weren't feeling well, could that student access the asynchronous session, which wouldn't be the same thing as the live one? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. That's kind of a rudiment. That's kind of a system that would happen. That's what schools try to do when students would stay home traditionally, is they try and figure out, they try and send home the work, they try and provide some at-home learning experiences. And that's one benefit of blended learning. So if a student's, hey, I'm not feeling well, the nice thing is we're not just replicating the learning again. It's not just the same thing over again. So yes, the student could then, instead of being in class that day, access the learning that's posted on Canvas or that's posted for students who are working at home, and utilize that work to continue to make progress through the curriculum. It might be a little more challenging because perhaps that student had something planned, or that teacher had something planned for that student that day in person. But it's better than just missing school. And so that's certainly one benefit of blended learning, that a teacher would be able to utilize some of the blended learning material if a student were to unexpectedly stay home. Andrew, there's a question about what we've learned about teaching IB. You're answering that live, it looks like?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that we've learned that students need to be very responsible and proactive and engaged in their learning, and have their own agency about that. We've also learned that, it is possible. And I think the whole world learned that it is possible to do this and overcome the challenge of completely online and also blended learning. I would say though that we also have, sorry, there's some construction going.
But we have a new cafeteria coming.
Yeah, we have a lot of connections to other schools who have also done blended learning models, and a lot of our teachers had no friends in other schools who have been doing this blended learning, and they're already reaching out and looking for solutions and answers and what works best. So we're a very connected school, and our staff is a big part of several international organizations, and collaborative learning is what we do best, and we are learning together.
Way to overcome that, Andrew. All right, just finish answering that one. Okay. Okay, so Andrew, I just want to translate the question that was posed in Spanish. I want everybody in the ISP community to know, estoy aprendiendo español, pero necesito más practicar porque no tengo un gran vocabulario, y cuando estoy leyendo estos frases hay palabras que no puedo entender, pero poco a poco voy a aprender, y ojalá que puedo hablar fluentemente en español en próximos años. Hopefully. But so a little Google Translate used here. So Andrew, the question is about, when you have education that blended learning requires a commitment from teachers to have creative classes, answer questions on time, post notes, feedback immediately. And the concern is there a commitment from IB to ensure quick feedback and quick turnaround on information, and ensure that teachers are providing timely feedback? Could you speak to that at all?
Just to make sure, the feedback is like, we're talking about feedback from the teachers to the students about their work.
Yeah, feedback on their work, feedback on perhaps work being done at home. How do we ensure that students aren't just sitting in a vacuum doing work and not being connected with the teacher? How do we ensure the teachers are committed to providing feedback and ensuring that students aren't just kind of progressing through the curriculum on their own?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the vast majority of the students who are going to be here every other day, now they won't see every class every other day. It might be because of the way the schedule works. They're still going to be in continuous contact with their teachers through Canvas. Our kids are very well, especially if they're in IB now, they most likely have been at school for a couple of years and they know Canvas very well. And our teachers understand that that is a primary means of connecting with their students. So we have some rules about like when feedback has to be given. And our teachers generally are able to follow that. So for large assessments, of course, it could take many days for the teachers to grade the work and report back. But even more important is the smaller formative tasks that are happening on an ongoing basis. So yeah, certainly work that is submitted, the teachers, and especially the high school level, require a little bit of time for the teachers to look through that stuff and give proper feedback. But if you think about it, the amount of work that you still have 20 students in the class, whether 10 are coming on one day or 10 are coming the other day. So the amount of actual, assessment and feedback that's happening is still the same for the same number of kids. It's just you're splitting it up in a different way. Another thing that is a benefit of splitting the cohorts is that, let's say you have 20 kids in the class, you would have only 10 in one day. So the teacher's in-class attention can be focused on those 10 kids instead of 20 kids. So that allows a teacher to more effectively reach those 10 kids and give them more feedback more frequently than they would have if there was 20 kids in the class. So the short answer is, yes, we have some rules about when feedback needs to be given. Teachers are following that feedback. And it will be in writing and in person and verbally. Some even record feedback, so it's verbal feedback, but online, so that students can access it later. But yeah, it's a very important part of our learning, which is the feedback on the formative work that the students are doing in preparation for the final, for the summative assessments.
Okay, so we're starting to run out of time, and Christina, just thanks so much for your comment and your support. I want to sum up a couple things. First, I want to be really candid and open, and you'll find that that's the type of principal that I'll strive to be, and I'll just always be really honest. And so I know how hard this is on parents, and it's really hard. And I want you all to know that every concern that you voice and objection that you may voice, that it comes from a place of advocacy for your children. And that I respect that. And really what you want for your children is the absolute best for them. That's why you have them at ISP. And I want you to know we know that and respect that because you care for your kids and want them to have the best education they can get. And so we know it's hard on you, and we know it hasn't been easy, and we're committed to supporting you. I want to also be really candid about how hard this is on teachers, and it really is hard. And I've been in education for 20 years, and I've never seen teachers work and cry and fight the way that they are to try and support our students. And that's not an excuse. That doesn't mean we're not going to deliver a great education, but it's the reality that this is really, really hard work. And it's hard on you and it's hard on us. But I'm all in on our commitment as a school to be there for your kids and try and figure out the best way to support their needs. I wish we could have them all here right now. As soon as we can, we'll be communicating about next steps and how we can better support them. But I promise you that every action that we can take to better meet their needs or to bring more of them here, we will take that action because we are a students first school. I know I haven't gotten to meet all of you in person. I'm really excited to do that. I'm really excited to attach your names to your faces and get to know you better. Andrew, thanks for doing this with me. This was really great, and I appreciate everything that you're doing to make not only our IB programming at our school great, but the quality of our academics at our school really great. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a request, I guess, from us as a team. We're all going through this. This is going to be a new model for us as a school. So, give us some time to get our procedures and norms settled. I mean, if you see in the first couple of days that, oh, this, like, we don't like this, it's just the first couple of days. So a teacher's going to need some time to develop those relationships with their kids and develop the norms, find out what works best with their kids, because every class might look a little different. Some classes might need a little bit more guidance here. Other classes might need a little bit less guidance over there. So it's going to be a little bit of a learning process for at least the first couple of weeks. So we do ask that parents and kids are patient and open-minded and helping us work together to find the best instructional practices for every kid.
Everyone have a wonderful week. You can expect to hear from me by email with some details and information about the start of school. We hope to see every student or nearly every student between Thursday and Friday. And I'm just so excited to start the year off and see more students on campus, and can't wait for the time that we'll get closer to school as normal. So thanks for your trust. Thanks for being here today. And we look forward to continuing to communicate and solve problems with you together. Everyone have a great afternoon, and we'll be sure that the recording of this gets sent out. Thanks, everyone.